Hi, welcome everyone to another video on management theories. Today we're going to talk about stress. And so this video is really designed for people who have an interest in learning about stress and how to handle it in the workplace and for themselves. I've really designed it really to explain the difference between different types of stress that we have and the difference between the twos and the threes, and also to how to fix it in the workplace, and also understand your own personal stress plan and how to address the situation where you might be feeling a lot of stress in your life. And so let's just start off this video with really just talking about the elephant on the table, so to speak. It's the fact that when it comes to workplace stress and your personal stress, it's getting worse. We're all feeling a lot more stress lately. The weight is on our shoulders, especially with this COVID thing and this pandemic. Some days where the day is over, all you can do is lay on the couch and binge on Netflix or on some other streaming platform. And we're seeing that also in the workplaces, translating into 80% of workplace accidents come from stress-related incidents. We're also hearing from reports that 33%, or about a third of the population, is reporting feeling extreme stress. And 48% of people say that stress hurts their personal and professional life. And I'll add a link to all this research down in the bottom of the channel description as well, or the video description, so you can watch and reference these links if you want to see more of this data. And so, like, if you think about it all getting worse, how many of us are finding that we're catching ourselves doom scrolling, consuming negative news all the time, which is spiraling us into anger, depression, or even worse? And maybe what we'll talk about here is also that there's also an organizational behavior, and in companies, there's two different types of stress, which I'll just show on the screen here. Is really that when it comes to stress, there's two different types of categories. One is category 1, which I'll define as acute short-term stress, and category 2, which is chronic or long-term stress and trauma. And it's really important to define these two categories because we'll be discussing them in today's lecture in this video on management theories. Is understanding what your employees are going through, whether they're going through this first category of this acute, really short-term stress, or this category 2, which is chronic or long-term stress and trauma within the workplace. This, what we can see from these two categories, if I can refer to them, is really that when it comes to these two stresses, it's very easy to handle the category 1, which is this acute short-term stress within the workplace, because it happens very quickly, it doesn't last very long, and we tend to be able to handle that very easily. The category 2, where it's this chronic or long-term stress and trauma, is the really difficult one, because that's the category that's really challenging to handle in the workplace all the time, because it starts to build on you, right? And that's the challenge, where it makes us more anxious, more stressed out, and less resilient in the workplace. So what we're seeing in the research is that how is COVID really affecting us right now? At the beginning of 2021, we're beginning to understand the impacts of COVID-19 and the pandemic, and how this has spiraled into 2021, and what we're looking at in terms of what we expect to happening in 2022. And we're seeing the social economic concerns of contamination, fears, xenophobia, traumatic stress, and compulsive checking on the news and the data. We're seeing that in 2021, some research that's coming out is that 56% of Canadians say they are feeling increased levels of stress or anxiety as a result of COVID-19. And if you're younger, it's affecting us, and you particularly more so. For example, 27% of young adults were screened for depressive disorders versus only 7% of adults aged 65 and older. This is a Canadian study, which I'll link in the bottom. But maybe what I'll also show is that there's also growing research in terms of how different generations are seeing this as well. So let's show you on the screen right now is that this just came out January 2022 from the American Psychological Association, is that when they looked at across different generations, is that around the stress levels, what we're seeing is that millennials are facing this extremely much more difficult situation than older adults, as you can see in this graph. And what we're seeing in this research is that the younger people are actually getting more affected by these results. An example of this is that I can talk about what's happening in the classroom, is that normally you'd be able to hang around on campus, socialize with other students, start to build your business network and your contacts, and millennials are feeling like, as they get through this pandemic, is that they are losing the business contacts they normally would be growing at this moment. And with Gen Zs, they feel like their 20s are being taken away from them at the moment, and they're losing this opportunity to actually have this freedom and this opportunity to live their 20s and their best life possible. And so this is becoming an increasingly large issue amongst young people, where they have depressive disorders, generalized anxiety, and PTSD from this experience in this pandemic. And so they're worried about their future career outlook, because their future seems downright impossible right now, because they don't have access to the same networking and opportunities to build business relationships in the classroom as well as on campus. So their traditional milestones of leaving home, getting married, celebrating their graduation, taking summer vacations, traveling the world, seem to all have disappeared in these opportunities. So we're seeing it really affect the young generation substantially more than others. And so for those of us that are older watching this channel, what you have to become is much more empathetic to the situation that younger generations are facing. But also, for if you're younger and watching this video, realize that it's okay to feel this, because people in your generation are actually feeling it together, and it's only natural. We're also seeing that when it comes to women, that they're feeling a lot more stress, 70% relative to men. There's a 70% larger group of women that are feeling more stress because of childcare responsibilities in addition to working from home. A trend report by John Elfein indicates that at the start of the 2020 COVID pandemic, 54% of Canadians were feeling more stressed than the previous month, and that's been steadily increasing over each month as it progresses as well. And so that we see that in women also are segmenting a quarter higher in terms of stress levels as well, because of the home care responsibility. There's also this recent interviews and surveys within Canadians is that from April to June 2021 is that stress levels were also increasing amongst not just women, but those not just and young people, but also LGBTQ2 plus population as those as well. And those families living with children are also increasing in terms of the stress. I'll link that because it's a recent new study that just got produced by Stats Canada, which is really interesting to see, is that they started studying the social happiness and the Canadian Social Survey, which is what they call the CSS survey by Stats Canada, which I'll post in the bottom as well. And so you're seeing all these struggles, adults really struggling to make daily decisions, especially millennials and women, LGBTQ as well. And the pandemic stress is also higher amongst people of color as well. So let's just quickly flash on the screen some of the results that we're seeing is that Hispanic adults, Black adults, Asian adults are showing higher levels of stress relative to non-Hispanic white adults. And this is from a recent US survey that just came out in January from the American Psychological Association as well. And so what's happening in the workplace, we're also seeing organizational constraints like interpersonal conflict, workplace overload, low task control because companies cut down on employees. So you see a lot of employees struggling to work in an organization when there's less employees, but also having to work online. And so what we are seeing though is how do we get out of this? Cover the 8-minute mark. So let's talk about what we can do in the workplace to make things better. Is that we're seeing that some people handle stress better because of some conditions such as they're exercising regularly, they have better physical health, they have stress coping strategies, their personality is naturally much more adaptive to the situation, and they have a positive self-concept, these 4 categories. And so what I also want to share is what we're stealing from different industries as well, is that what we're seeing in sports psychology is that what we're seeing is that professional athletes also tend to deal with stress better in these situations because they practice what I call the art of the Master Carpenter. They're able to be very mindful and have a hobby or an exercise or something that gets them focused so much on it, just like a long distance runner might go, and that high that comes from going out and for a run on a regular basis and getting some exercise. Or they have a hobby of painting. So when they have this mindful exercise of getting away for an hour and painting for an hour, it really relaxes them as well. And we see this research also going across professional soldiers as well, who have this art of the Master Carpenter philosophy, where they might go shooting long distance and really relax, for example. Celebrities who also have this art of the Master Carpenter where they get lost in the art. And so what we're seeing is that successful people really practice this art of mastery and getting away from it all, so to speak. And so they also have these elements of the art of not stopping, just focusing on the task and getting things done, the art of taking the initiative, and the art of rising to the challenge. So what we're seeing across different industries is this psychology effect in the workplace as well. So let's talk about the workplace for a second. And what we're seeing in creating a culture of how to manage stress is creating a workplace culture that takes center stage with talking about stress on a regular basis in the workplace, and not making it something to be embarrassed, but calling it out. And that way employees have a positive perception that the organization has an authentic wellness culture, and so that they can talk about their stress and deal with it together in a group situation. And what we're seeing is that employees, relative to those in bad wellness cultures, have a higher level, roughly a 50% higher rating in terms of their engagement and stress management techniques because of that. So ask yourself as a manager, what could you be doing in your workplace to introduce a wellness culture that maybe once a month talks about things that are happening in the workplace that are causing people stress and how people are handling it, talking about, how are you implementing this techniques from other industries to implement managing stress within the workplace. And so this wellness culture can introduce things such as ensuring that coworkers have good relationships with each other, talking about, fun things that are happening. A good relationship with their immediate supervisor is also key. Good HR policies talk about this, making ways to ensure that there's socialization and taking breaks to happen within the workplace. So not every meeting is always about work, but some have an implement some ideas of having fun during those Zoom meetings, for example. And so that's, I'll also link some additional resources at the bottom of this YouTube video as well to share with you some of the techniques that you can do to manage stress personally. I think it's really important to understand is that what we're starting to see with this COVID, this pandemic, is really that what we're moving towards in organizational behavior is that we're seeing this moving from acute short-term stress to really chronic or long-term stress with some of our employees, and it's definitely our younger generation. So as a manager, what can you do to think about how do I remove this category 2 long-term stress that my young employees are feeling, and how to address that? And if you're a young employee, realizing that this is happening and figuring out these techniques on how to address that step by step by being mindful, exercising, taking breaks, and getting away from that stress and thinking about how to handle that yourself. And so I hope this video helps. It's about 32 minutes long, so I will cut it off here, but hopefully it gives you some ideas on how to manage stress yourself, but also change the stress environment within your workplace as well. So I hope everyone's doing well, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.